Hello, Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City and beyond, Dr. Andrea Letamendi. Hello, Andrea.
Hi, Mr. Brian Ward.
I got to tell you, we received a ton of tweets and emails about last week's show, mostly about something you brought up. And I want to get you to talk a little more about it because it really seemed to be the topic of conversation for a lot of people. And that is this concept of the backfire effect. And it's something that you brought up last week when you were talking about people in arguments, even when providing information, and you compared it to something else. What was that?
The confirmation bias.
Right. So, frankly, the listeners, they want to hear more about this.
They do.
They do want to hear more. We actually got, a ton of emails specifically. And what I thought was great was I saw at least 2 or 3 tweets specifically from people in the mental health field that wanted to hear a little bit more about this because it's something that I guess isn't necessarily covered a lot.
Well, certainly I think folks are more familiar with what's called the confirmation bias, which is basically when we seek information that's consistent with our attitudes. But the backfire effect is a different kind of social or cognitive bias that I guess isn't as talked about. But I think we experience it a lot, especially when we're, like I said before, when we're online, maybe on Twitter or Facebook, and somebody tries to correct us or has a different ideological perspective and gives us facts that are inconsistent with our beliefs. And rather than get swayed by those facts, I mean, oftentimes, how often do you get into a Twitter argument and then the result is, oh, actually, you're right, I changed my mind? No.
Yeah, not too often.
No, it's very rare. Usually those conversations get very heated or they devolve to, personal attacks. And part of that is because of the backfire effect, which is when our beliefs, our attitudes actually get stronger when we're presented with corrective information or information that is inconsistent with our attitudes, even if those are actual facts.
So this should not be confused with the confirmation bias, which was specifically the going and looking for information that helps your case. You are talking about someone who isn't necessarily looking for information that helps their case, but somehow or another, the information that's relayed to them, even though it goes directly against their case, just makes them that much more stubborn and more willing to dig into their own beliefs.
Right. It actually strengthens their attitudes, which makes us think about, whether we want to offer people corrective information, especially online. And the reason for that is that this bias or this effect happens because usually the corrective information is unwelcome. It's usually brought about in a corrective form, and that's why the response is to dig in our heels and actually strengthen our attitudes. A lot of times this isn't a conscious choice of ours. That's why it's called an effect. It just sort of automatically happens where our beliefs get stronger.
So we had, I think, about 3 different people ask the same question, but I think Colin asked it best when he says, what kind of situations cause people to change their beliefs and what kinds of people are willing to change?
That's a great question. And I think there's a lot of factors that go into changing beliefs or changing perspectives. That question is related to another question we got about CBT, which is a psychotherapy that mental health providers and psychologists use actually to help patients to change their perspectives and beliefs. So the reason I bring up that example is that in my response to Colin, I would say the backfire effect doesn't necessarily happen when you're in a mutual exchange where there's an agreement that one person is working with the other person to change their belief, like in a therapeutic relationship, for instance.
So you're talking about someone who wants to change and is working toward change, being willing to change, versus someone who you're arguing with, who wants to be right.
Well, it's not, and I really want to clarify, it's not necessarily that they want to be right or that they want to be argumentative. The natural response to getting corrective feedback or to getting information that's inconsistent with our attitudes is to kind of block that out, because it's difficult for us to make those grand shifts in ideology or grand shifts in perception. So we tend to hold very, very firmly onto our beliefs. The difference is that when we're involved in a therapeutic relationship, and I bring up CBT because that's a core component of the therapy. We've talked about CBT before on the show. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's an effective psychotherapy for multiple problems and mental health issues, but mostly known for its effectiveness for mood and anxiety disorders. And one of the core components of CBT is to work with the patient to question and challenge beliefs that tend to be either irrational or inaccurate, or tend to create that feeling of anxiety or feeling of low mood. So the idea is to work with the patient on identifying that inaccurate belief and on reforming it or framing it, understanding it in a more realistic way so that it's less damaging to the self. So the reason I bring that up is that when you have a therapist or a mental health provider working with you to challenge your own beliefs, that is a different dynamic. That's a different effect that's happening, and the backfire effect would be less likely to occur. But again, you have to remember that you have a trusting relationship, and that it's actually, many psychologists would argue, it's not the mental health provider that's providing the corrective information. It's the individual patient who's coming up with more accurate reflections of their environment or their surroundings or social atmosphere. So that dynamic is a little bit different.
Whatever.
Oh, geez.
Just kidding. Okay, so let's move on to another question that we had. This one comes from Mr. Hira Singh. And this was also about last week's episode, and it's not as much a question so much as maybe a speculative observation, and I just want to get your opinion on this. And he says, after watching Trial, I was hoping you might consider what exactly the villain's rationale was for setting up the trial in the first place. I believe that Van Dorn minimizing their criminality in public as simply as it was all Batman's fault was a threat to their ego and came across to the villains as very minimalizing. By setting up this mock trial, it allows the villains to have a platform in front of Van Dorn where they are the center of attention and therefore boost their own egos. It would also allow Van Dorn to appreciate villains as a product of themselves rather than as a symptom of Batman's presence in Gotham. Yours sincerely, Mr. Hira Singh. What do you think, Drea? Do you think it's possible that they saw this on the news, got really upset that Batman was basically getting credit for all of their actions, and then they decided to put on this sort of circus in front of Van Dorn, knowing that maybe the outcome was that they weren't going to be found guilty?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great perspective about this, in that this, like you said, this was a kind of a circus, a performance, if you will, an exercise in getting to put someone on the stand and discuss how they came to be. And maybe even to take it a step further, I think that their interests were about being showcased and being in the spotlight and being a part of that, what you call circus. So I think there are multiple elements to it that this writer is correct, I believe, in his perception that it wasn't just about the charge. It wasn't just about whether Batman was responsible for creating them.
Right.
I think this was an exercise in all sorts of different things, and ultimately we have to think about their personalities and what their motivations are. And oftentimes it's about the violation. It's about the discomfort. It's about the, their inside out world of criminality and of deviance. And I think that whole showcase was all about those personalities.
Yeah. Yeah. And now that I think about it that way, maybe that's why Riddler didn't say anything the entire time, because he's the kind of guy who would come up with this entire fiasco to begin with. He just sat back and watched it all fall into place, just like you would expect the Riddler to do. It was all very interesting. And I'm really thankful for everyone who sent us tweets and emails. Andrea, I'm thankful for you, of course, for being able to come back and talk a little bit more about some of that stuff, because it was very interesting and a lot of people got a lot out of it. And I thought it was great that people even in your industry were asking questions about it. So thank you for introducing that to us. This week, it might be a little bit more straightforward. I don't know if you got a clear sense of if maybe your psychology sense was tingling at all during this episode, but to me it seemed like Avatar was more of a straightforward action, silly action episode.
Yeah, this episode was clearly about the adventures of Indiana Jones.
It kind of was. It was Indiana Jonesy, but there were also a couple of other different maybe homages that I could think of, and it was very interesting. But let's be honest. Did you see a lot of psychology in this? We're going to go through the episode, but did you see a lot that you could pull from?
The strongest component of this episode, psychologically speaking, is the villain and the relationship between, or the triangle, if you will, the triangular relationship between the villain, Batman, and the villain's daughter.
Yeah. Well, we can certainly talk about the villain and his daughter as we talk about Avatar. So let's set the scene a little bit. It's Egypt, 1898. There's an excavation going down. Archaeologists are uncovering all kinds of little neat things. And suddenly the head archaeologist is lost, sucked down a tomb hole of some kind. Now, Trey, something that I thought was really great in the beginning of this episode is that it was all done to music. There were people talking, but we couldn't hear them. There was no audible dialogue. And now it's a really adventurous and really kind of risky take for the animated series to do, especially as we've talked about before. This is a series ostensibly for kids. It's in the mid-90s. You have no idea if you're missing a channel of audio or what, but it was all music. And that was pretty awesome.
Well, I think that speaks to the variety of episodes in this series. That certainly you knew immediately this was going to be one of the more one of the adventures that was occurring outside of Gotham City, and so it would be exotic, it would be different, and of course, if this is your first time seeing the episode, that tells you that the nature of the adventure would include a villain that we don't often see in Gotham City. So I think that the opening is very cool and very enticing that way.
It was very cool. But we then go to present day Gotham City, and we see Bruce being Bruce, but a little more Bruce than we're used to seeing. This version of Bruce is a little more sort of put on than we're accustomed to seeing. Occasionally we'll see him at a dinner party or something like that, and he'll sort of be putting on that aloof Bruce Wayne persona that you call it. Now, to refresh people's memories, you believe that Bruce has three different sort of incarnations, three different personalities. There is Bruce Wayne.
Well, wait. He certainly doesn't have three personalities.
No, not three individual personalities that inhabit the body at the same time, but there are certainly three different characters that he puts on.
I think that he has one identity, but he has three personas. So one being Bruce Wayne, the public figure, the philanthropist, the billionaire, the kind of little bit snobby, distant, mysterious man.
And bored by historical artifacts.
Clearly.
Yeah. Oops, I gotta go meet Tammy at Chardet's.
And we got a little bit of him in this episode. Batman, of course, is the Caped Crusader, the missionary, the vigilante, the man who is dedicated and purely devoted to this mission and tends to have very rigid black and white thinking. And then Bruce, who I believe is kind of the truest identity, or the integrated identity, who certainly has morals and ethics, and certainly has an interest in relationships, and is also dedicated to the mission, but I think is, as I said, a more whole integrated person. And the three personas are kind of present depending on what Bruce's interests are. So here we have Bruce Wayne seeming to be a bit uninterested in this artifact and a little bit off put by it. And there's a reason for that.
Yeah, and he's sitting there talking to Lucius Fox, who we know is the man who handles the sort of day-to-day business side of Wayne Enterprises.
You can be quite the humanitarian on occasion, Bruce. It's commendable. It's inspiring.
It's deductible.
Later, someone is seen trying to steal that very artifact. That artifact is the Scroll of Osiris, and
Bless you.
Thank you. And only half of that scroll still exists. We don't know where the other half is, but something tells me we'll find out soon enough. This big hulking figure of a person is trying to steal the scroll. Batman, of course, stops him and unmasks him. And who is it, Drea?
Ubu.
Ubu. Now, if you remember, Ubu is the thug, the oafish thug who's got a, bad case of hatred for Batman because he believes that he's an infidel. And he is the right-hand man of Ra's al Ghul.
Ra's al Ghul.
Ra's al Ghul.
Ra's al Ghul.
None other.
We were convinced he was dead when he fell down into the Lazarus Pit, except that we saw his hand come back out, afterward. But
right. Well, I think we should kind of revisit what happened in the last episode, where Ra's al Ghul and his daughter Talia and Batman were in a scuffle. It was, if you recall, one of those episodes where Batman was traveling throughout all these countries and trying to track down Ra's al Ghul, and his daughter was once again seeming to be partnering with Batman until, of course, we realize her devotion is to her father.
Right. And then he introduced us to the Lazarus Pit, this pit of rejuvenating goo that Ra's falls into, becomes all better, albeit a little crazy at first. He loses his mind there momentarily, nearly kills his own daughter, and his whole thing is he really wanted Batman to join forces with him and eventually take over the sort of Ra's al Ghul personality. He wanted to have a successor, and he wanted to marry that successor off to his daughter. And Batman, of course, rejected him, which may have hurt Ra's feelings, maybe his pride and his ego a little bit more than anything else. But the two of them fought to what they thought was Ra's death. And now we find that wasn't true. Ra's al Ghul is back. And
he's as youthful as ever.
Yeah, he's absolutely as youthful as ever. But what's scary is, once again, he is able to knock Batman unconscious. And he ends up taking the half of the scroll that he wanted. Now, Batman then tries to figure out where Ra's al Ghul might have taken this scroll, and he ends up going to Gibraltar. And he's looking very Romancing the Stone when he steps off the plane. I'm not talking about Michael Douglas's character in Romancing the Stone. I'm talking about like Danny DeVito, sort of light, white suit, fedora, wide-brimmed hat. He's looking very much like he stands out like a sore thumb here in this environment. And he ends up finding Talia.
Beloved?
Talia is surprised to see him. And furthermore, she appears to not have known that Ra's al Ghul was alive. She might be a little put off by that.
Of course.
Try to talk a little bit about you're the daughter of this guy who tried to basically destroy the world with his Lazarus pits. And you thought he was dead. You love him very much, but now you find out he's alive and he didn't even tell you.
Yeah, Talia and her father have always had this this interesting dynamic between them where, of course, there have been demonstrations that they love each other and that they believe that they are different than other people. They're aligned with this, this belief that they're superior to other people, especially Ra's al Ghul. But it's interesting that there are times where they appear to betray each other. And there are times when Talia appears to align with Batman and comes across as being willing to overthrow her father. And this is one example where it's her father who has distanced himself and potentially kept this secret from her. So of course there's that sense of betrayal.
Well, and you find out that he betrayed her basically because she chose Batman, the life of her beloved, over her father at some point in time. And in an effort to save Batman's life, she ended up alienating her father. And really, it's just a really kind of twisted family dynamic, I think. It's very interesting to watch these two go at it. But she explains to Bruce that Ra's is sort of obsessed with finding this tomb, and he needs both halves of this scroll in order to do it. Bruce wants Talia's help. I don't know that I would ask for that, given the history that you've had with this family. You don't know if you can trust her. You certainly can't trust him. And I don't know if I could trust her when in the same room with her father. So I got to question Bruce's own motivation here. I think he's just smitten with this girl and wants her to
I was
tag
going to say,
along.
this is for the high. This is for the excitement. Why go on this adventure and leave her out of it?
Yeah.
I think that she adds an element of exhilaration and of mystery and that element of not knowing if she's purely devoted to him or could double cross him. I think that's something that appeals to Batman. And again, we talked about this when we rewatched the show, that she's one of the few people that knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman.
Right.
So he can trust her. He knows he can trust her on that level.
I don't know that that's true. I don't know that I would necessarily trust someone who knew me if they've betrayed me a couple of times. And remember, the last time we saw her, he was off kissing her on a dune and then left her there. Like, just took off.
That's true.
He
abandoned her out in the middle of the desert.
I don't know that I would go back to her. I'm surprised she didn't just slap him right there. Very, very like Marion Ravenwood-esque at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Just greet Batman with a punch.
Yeah, she's above that.
She might be. They end up going to Cairo, and they're searching out for one of Raish's old hideouts, and end up finding it. And the scroll is, in fact, there, complete, and it's got a translation with it. Now, it's explained that Ra's basically wants the power of this old queen.
The power once held by almighty Thoth Capera, queen of 2 continents.
Bruce and Talia are captured by Ra's and Ubu. And while he's off trying to claim this power of the immortal Thoth Capera, they are trapped in what appears to be a plexiglass or glass sort of cell and can't seem to get out. Now, when the scene picks up, they appear to have been in this cell for quite a while. Bruce is banging on it, trying to get out, can't break the glass. And Talia's just sort of sitting there, you know, she's conflicted. She's just seen her father. He's alive. She's in this glass cell with Batman. She doesn't really know what to do. Bruce is punching on the glass and then takes out this little sonic device and bursts it, which makes me think Bruce really likes the challenge, because if he had that thing in his pocket the entire time, there's really no reason to try punching this glass. He seemed to be able to get out whenever he wanted. So he's almost like, I'm going to give your father about an hour head start. And then I'm going to use this little thing.
Maybe he forgot that he had it with him.
Bruce doesn't strike me as the type of guy who forgets that he has anything, especially if it's like attached to his belt.
They also had to have, I believe at this moment, a little bit of a stall for the commercial break.
That's true. That's true. I think if that were the case, I think if we were to watch this without commercials, what should have happened is, like, right after the commercial break, you would have seen like Bruce looking at the camera going, now? Okay, now. And then they shatter. But regardless, he was in and out of that thing so quickly, and you really wonder how much time was wasted. Bruce does make one thing very clear, though, and he tells Talia that he's going to do whatever he has to.
And though it breaks my heart, I will do what I must as well.
Somehow, we don't always think that means the two of them are on the same page.
No.
Especially when talking about Ra's al Ghul and Talia. They end up going to the tomb, and Batman and Talia find Ra's.
Remember, Thoth Capera was immortal. Her subjects deified her, named her after the ancient gods of infinite knowledge and eternal life. And in a few short moments, I will be privy to those same secrets of life and death.
At this point, here's what I'm thinking. Ra's al Ghul is about 600 years old.
Give or take.
He has access to the Lazarus Pit, which, as we know, is a lake of goo that when you're immersed in it, you're basically rejuvenated. It's like the fountain of youth in the Batman universe. So why on earth is he seeking this this dead queen who has, quote unquote, secrets of life and death when he already has that?
I mean, think about what happens to Ra's al Ghul after he comes out of the Lazarus Pit. He is rejuvenated, but he is crazed for a period of time. He's basically lost his mind. He's got super strength, and he's going to kill his own daughter. I would think that if he in fact wants this life and death secret, where he could essentially be immortal without coming with those side effects, I would think that would be very appealing to someone who wanted to take over the world. So he goes to her and tries to find out these secrets. I could be wrong, but that would be my guess.
So it's his version of I want a new drug.
Yes.
One that doesn't make me tired.
One that doesn't make you sick.
One that won't make me crash my car.
All right, we're done. We're done with the Huey Lewis and the News lyrics. So while Ra's is here, he finds exactly what he's looking for, and that is the tomb of Thoth Capera. He opens it up, and much like Belloc, again in Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's nothing but dust and sand, and he's very upset by this. Until he finds this secret staircase. He goes down into the staircase and finds what looks to be another Lazarus Pit. I mean, it's essentially the exact same thing. And from that pit comes Thoth Capera rising, offering Ra's whatever information he seeks.
The secret of life and death.
Yeah. And not all is as it seems. Now, tell me, Drea, I know that you're not a huge fan of like horror movies, but you've seen The Shining. Are you telling me this scene wasn't an exact homage to The Shining, as you've got a beautiful woman rising up from this tub, essentially, just like she does in the room in The Shining. She comes over, she kisses him, and then is suddenly a decrepit, skeletal woman, and not someone you want to be kissing. And she is sucking the life force from Ra's al Ghul by the time Talia and Batman come in. And they end up fighting her. Goop monsters sort of come out of this pit.
These like creatures come out of her Lazarus Pit.
Right.
Oh, this sounds like a weird story.
It does.
They come...
One that's not safe for work.
They come out of her Lazarus Pit, and they morph. Like, they basically grow out and attack Ra's al Ghul. And something that's interesting is that surrounding the pit are dead bodies, which I think, for me, that would be the first clue to get the heck out of there.
Yeah, because these are potentially people who have come looking for this secret before, or people who have stumbled upon this before, and you are now seeing her secret to long life, and that is draining the life out of others. And in Ra's, as you said, hundreds of years old, has a lot of life force to give. So she is, sucking that life force directly from him, and, he is left sort of crippled as they fight Thoth Capera and her goopy monster viney army things. Now, I have to ask a question, because we do know that going forward, eventually we'll get to meet people like Superman, and, we'll get to meet the Justice League and stuff like that. But in Batman the Animated Series, Batman is the closest thing we've seen to a meta-human in the DC Animated Universe. In this story, we've met Batman. We know that he's a normal person with extraordinary abilities.
Right.
At what point do you just go, nope? Like, you've now seen something. Sure, we've seen the Lazarus Pit. We've seen Ra's al Ghul come out of it, and it's kind of supernatural, his superhuman ability. But you've just watched this demon woman, come up out of this thing, and gooey monsters coming out. At what point does Batman go, you know what? Gotham doesn't look so bad anymore. I'm going to go back there.
Why does he suddenly sound like Beetlejuice?
Because I think that's what happens when goopy monsters, come after you, is you instantly become Beetlejuice.
You're right. This episode is more like a fantasy, more like a horror type episode. Like, it's completely themed differently than what we're used to with the Dark City, the noir tone. Like, it's
not crime, it's supernatural.
It is. And it's not that it isn't entertaining. I think it's really fascinating, but how does a man in a suit fight ghouly ghouls coming out of the Lazarus Pit type thing? He doesn't.
I'll tell you how he does it. He does it exactly the way Indiana Jones would do it, and that is as Talia is taking her father away from this goopy pit. Batman climbs onto a giant totem, a big statue, sort of Anubis-y looking thing, and he uses his legs to shake it loose, and it crashes down on top of the hole and destroys the temple. And presumably she is now down for the count and gone.
Right, and the entire place is crumbling.
Yeah.
So it's similar to the Last Crusade, right?
Yes. Well, yes. It goes from the moving of the statue and going that down, which would be Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then instantly jumps to Last Crusade, where suddenly the entire place has come crumbling down. She must have died, because somehow the power has left her and it is returned to him. He is now completely normal, and he admits that maybe he should have been a better father to Talia.
My apologies to you, daughter. Though I had abandoned you in my heart, obviously you had not done the same.
And Batman is going to take him back to the authorities because he has much to answer for. And that's when Talia makes her move. She aims to...
Yeah, I think it's a moment that we should really describe well, because she looks down at her father's wrists that are roped up.
Yeah.
And she sees that he is seen as a criminal and will be imprisoned and will be charged with these crimes. So I think that she's recalling that this is her father and that they're family, and the one thing she must do is save him.
This is a message, though, right? This is a message to Batman in some way for having left her in the middle of the desert. Because let's be honest, even if Ra's al Ghul gets taken back to Gotham City and gets thrown into prison, even if Ra's al Ghul ends up in Arkham Asylum or in Blackgate or whatever, he's not going to be in there for long. Let's be clear. And I think she knows this. She knows that Ra's al Ghul is perfectly capable of taking care of himself, especially with Ubu there next to him. And there's no way he's going to make it back to Gotham City. So she must be sort of sending a little bit of a signal to Batman when she raises her gun, points it at him, and says,
I am truly sorry, beloved, but he is my father.
She cuts the ropes, and she and Ra's al Ghul leave. They take Batman's horse away from him, and they leave. Ubu, interestingly enough, he's the one with the biggest arc, because we've seen him in Demon's Quest Part 1, Demon's Quest Part 2. He really has a shine on for Batman, really doesn't like him, constantly referring to him as infidel, even does it in this episode. And here, he tosses Batman a canteen of water and then rides off. Like he now has respect because Batman saved him.
I think that he's showing his humanity, and Batman saved his life. So the least he could do is offer him something before abandoning him in the middle of the desert.
Right.
And I think you're right about Talia. This is some major payback.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see them again. I thought this episode was great because we ended up getting, we saw Lucius Fox in the beginning, played by Brock Peters, came back to do that episode. Ra's al Ghul, of course, played again brilliantly by David Warner. And Thoth Capera was played by Nichelle Nichols, who a lot of people, of course, know as Uhura in Star Trek.
The original series.
All three of these people, major figures in Star Trek, and in fact, all three were in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, together. So I thought it was kind of cool as a Trekkie myself to hear all three of these voices. But Drea, we're getting an opportunity to see more of Ra's. He doesn't necessarily seem to be changing all that much. Talia, I think, is certainly the person who she is torn between two sides. So her psychology is getting a little interesting.
Yeah, I think Talia is almost like an individual who has aspects of her father, rightly so, biologically and in terms of the environment she was raised in. Mm-hmm. That would make sense, and then aspects of the opposite personality, or the opposite characteristic of having an appeal toward humanity and wanting to have a relationship that's normal, that's with a person who is outside of that fantastical world.
Right.
Even though Batman, you'd consider him to be quite unique and not necessarily a normal average guy, he is more within the realm of normality than, say, her father,
right,
or someone from her father's fantastical world. So I find her to be quite interesting that way. And the sad aspect of this episode is that her father expressed that he understands that offspring offer immortality to a degree. He mentions that, most people would consider having children as a way to be immortal. But he then clarifies that he has no interest in that being his immortality.
Right.
To him, he wants immortality through these supernatural ways, like the Lazarus Pit or Thoth Kapura.
Yeah.
Is that right? Thoth Kapura. Thoth Kapura's.
Yeah.
Life and death.
He wants to
wisdom.
legitimately live forever.
Yes, and for him, that's the most meaningful accomplishment. Like, that's his goal. Has nothing to do with family, has nothing to do with his daughter, has nothing to do with relationships. He is truly embodying that almost an exaggeration of that grandiose narcissistic personality that nobody in the world is as great as I am, not even my own family members, and nothing can bring me joy except being immortal. So for him, I think I'm seeing the height of that wish and that orientation toward him being the center of his universe. And it's a little bit sad that he sees his daughter that way, as oftentimes a tool or a ways to get some other need met, but certainly not as an important person in his life. So I found this to be an interesting episode in that we're kind of understanding him a little bit more.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to getting to see him again and maybe diving in a little deeper. Next week,
Into the Goopy Pit.
I don't necessarily need to go into the Goopy Pit, especially if what comes out of there ends up looking like she eventually did, or the Goopy Monsters. Next week, we get to revisit an old friend of ours by the name of Pamela Isley. And apparently she's turned over a new leaf. So we'll get to see just how turned over this leaf is. Will she go straight? We don't know. But there might be a new love interest in her life. That coming up next week on House and Garden, written by Paul Dini, so you know it's going to be a good episode. Drea, until then, where can folks find you online?
GoopyPit.com.
I don't think that's where they can find you. I've got it bookmarked, and I've never seen you on that.
Fine. I am at Arkham Asylum Doc on Twitter, and my website is underthemask.online.com.
You can find me. I am at bward028, and of course, you can find both of us. We are on Twitter at Arkham Sessions. You can definitely email all of your questions about goopiness and beyond over, we are arkhamsessions@gmail.com. And I highly encourage you to go check out our family over at fanboycomics.net. That is fanboycomics.net, where you can check out all kinds of great podcasts, as well as some great comics. And, be sure to go and visit them at their various, signings and events. You'll certainly be seeing us at a few of them coming up. And you can follow them on Twitter, of course, at Fanboy Comics. Comics spelled with an X. Until next week, I am Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Andrea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.